Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to get into today's material with you because we're exploring what is honestly one of the most fascinating psychological and historical journeys ever recorded. We're tracking the path of Siddhartha Gautama. This is a guy who basically had to tear down his entire, seemingly perfect life just to figure out the actual truth of existence. It's a story of wild extremes, and it seriously challenges how we think about happiness and suffering, even today. Let's get right into it. So I want you to start by putting yourself in this almost unimaginable scenario. Think about it. What happens when you're handed literally everything you could ever want, but you are completely hidden from the truth? Imagine growing up in a bubble where every single desire is instantly met, every need is anticipated, but the actual reality of the human condition, the hard stuff, is just entirely censored from your view. That's the exact high-stakes setup we're looking at here. We're following a prince raised in a totally artificial paradise, and we're going to see what happens when that perfect little illusion finally shatters. Okay, picture this. Over 2.5 millennia ago, in the Himalayan foothills of what we now call Nepal, King Suddhodana is throwing this massive celebration for the birth of his son, Siddhartha. But then, this wise seer named Asita comes to see the baby, and he actually starts weeping. He delivers this huge prophecy declaring that this boy is destined to become either a legendary, world-conquering king or a supreme, enlightened spiritual leader. Well, the king really wanted a powerful heir to take over the family business, right? He absolutely did not want a spiritual wanderer. So the king makes a fateful choice. He decides to totally shield his son from any form of human suffering whatsoever. His logic was, hey, if the kid never sees the world's pain, he's never going to go looking for a spiritual cure. And man, did he deliver on that. We are talking about the ultimate gilded cage. Siddhartha literally had 3 different palaces, just so he'd be perfectly comfortable no matter the season. He's wearing the finest, softest silks, there's gorgeous music playing pretty much 24/7, and servants are just swarming around, catering to his every single whim. But the crazy part? The king ordered that any sign of aging, sickness, or death had to be completely scrubbed from his environment, hidden away. Siddhartha grows up, he marries this beautiful princess, Yasodhara. They have a son, Rahala. From the outside, pure, unblemished bliss. But here's the dramatic irony. His father's obsessive helicopter parenting was essentially creating this intense pressure cooker that would virtually guarantee the exact prophecy he was trying to avoid. And that pressure cooker builds and builds until he hits a major turning point. Age 29. Really lock that number in. For 29 whole years, Siddhartha lived his life without ever seeing the harsh realities that the rest of us deal with every day. But, human curiosity is an incredibly powerful thing. Even with every earthly pleasure right at his fingertips, this deep, restless curiosity just started gnawing at him. He simply had to know what was going on beyond those giant fortified palace walls. So he finally convinces his charioteer, a guy named Channa, to secretly sneak him out for a ride through the royal city. Now, the king had actually given strict orders to clear the streets of anything remotely unpleasant before the prince's ride. But, as we know, you can't hide reality forever. And this kicks off a sequence of events historically known as the 4 fateful sights. Sight number 1, an old man. Siddhartha spots this frail, deeply wrinkled guy leaning super heavily on a cane. He had literally never laid eyes on an elderly person before. Can you imagine? Totally shocked, he turns to his charioteer, and Channa basically has to break the news to him that, yeah, aging is inevitable, and it eventually happens to absolutely everyone. So the illusion starts to crack, and it keeps shattering on his next trips out. Sight number 2, a sick man. Siddhartha sees someone on the side of the road, covered in sores, just trembling from some terrible disease. Once again, he turns to Channa, totally confused. And Channa has to explain that illness is just a random, terrifying part of life. It's a vulnerability that spares no one, no matter how much royal blood you have. But then comes the heaviest blow of all. Sight number 3, a corpse. Siddhartha comes across an actual funeral procession. He watches these devastated, weeping relatives carrying a lifeless body out to a cremation pyre. Just think about the psychological impact of that on a 29-year-old brain that had literally never even conceptualized mortality before. Channa gently explains that death is the absolute, inescapable finish line for all of us. In that moment, the prince realizes that even he, with his palaces, his guards, his silk robes, would one day end up exactly like that corpse. Deeply shaken, his entire worldview is just completely turned upside down, Siddhartha encounters the 4th and final sight, a wandering ascetic. And this
was just a massive contrast to everything he'd known and everything he'd just seen. Here's this spiritual seeker, shaved head, rough robe, carrying nothing in the world except a little begging bowl. Yet, despite having zero material wealth, the guy just radiated this aura of profound, unshakable peace. And seeing that, it sparked this tiny glimmer of hope right in the middle of the prince's massive existential crisis.
So, this crushing realization of universal suffering we've been talking about, it actually has a specific term, dukkha. And grasping dukkha just changed the game entirely for Siddhartha. He looked around and suddenly realized his luxurious palace wasn't a paradise at all. It was a prison. It was an illusion. All his money, all his power, completely useless against the raw facts of aging, sickness, and death. He knew right then that he couldn't just go back to the banquets and the music. He had to figure out a permanent way out of this universal suffering. Which brings us to the next big chapter of his journey, the Great Renunciation. Once that reality of dukkha set in, staying in the palace was just impossible for him. So in the dead of night, this 29-year-old prince makes an incredibly difficult, heartbreaking choice. First, he sneaks into the bedroom where his beautiful wife and tiny son are fast asleep. He desperately wants to hold them, but he knows if he wakes them up for a tearful goodbye, his resolve is going to crumble. So he turns away in total silence. Next, he rides out into the dark forest with Channa, going all the way to the very edge of his father's territory. Then he draws his royal sword and just slices off his long hair, which was a huge status symbol back then. Finally, he takes off his expensive silk clothes, swaps them for the scratchy robes of a beggar, hands his horse and jewels over to Channa, and just walks into the dark, terrifying unknown, completely alone. Now, out in the wild, Siddhartha didn't waste any time. He immediately sought out the most famous spiritual gurus and meditation masters he could find. And the guy was intensely focused. He actually mastered their techniques pretty quickly, getting into these incredibly deep, profound trance states. But his analytical mind caught the flaw right away. He realized these trances were basically just temporary vacations from reality. The second he opened his eyes and stopped meditating, all that suffering was just sitting there waiting for him again. It wasn't the permanent fix he was so desperate for. So what does he do? He swings the pendulum all the way to the other extreme. He figures, okay, maybe if I aggressively punish my physical body, it'll somehow liberate my mind. He links up with these 5 other ascetics, and for 6 years, they put themselves through absolute hell. Extreme self-deprecation. He's living completely exposed in these dangerous tiger-filled forests. He's literally sleeping on beds of thorns. He would hold his breath until he was basically blacking out. And get this, he restricted his diet so intensely that he was surviving on just a single grain of rice or 1 leaf per day. He was attacking his own biology with the exact same intensity that he used to enjoy his luxuries. And, well, you can guess where this inevitably leads, right? Rock bottom. Through all this relentless, punishing self-torture, Siddhartha essentially turned himself into a living skeleton. He pushed his physical limits so far that he was eventually too weak to even stand upright. One afternoon, he's trying to wash himself in the Naranjana River, and his body just totally quits on him. He collapses into the water. He's literally inches away from drowning to death, all in the name of trying to be spiritually pure. But somehow, he manages to desperately claw his way back onto the riverbank. And right then, this incredible moment of pure grace happens. A young village girl named Sujata sees this starving, dying ascetic lying there. Out of sheer compassion, she walks over and offers him a simple bowl of sweet milk rice. And Siddhartha takes it. As he finally eats some real food, he can actually feel the physical strength surging back into his arms and legs. But way more importantly, his mind, which had been incredibly foggy and probably hallucinating from years of literal starvation, snaps back. It becomes brilliantly, intensely clear again. As that mental fog lifts, Siddhartha has a massive epiphany. He looks at his life and realizes, okay, on one hand, I had the absolute peak of luxury and extreme indulgence back at the palace. Did it bring me peace? No, it just distracted me from the pain. On the other hand, I just spent 6 years pushing extreme self-torture to its absolute breaking point out here in the forest. Did that work? No, it just almost killed me. The truth suddenly became glaringly obvious to him. The answer wasn't out on those extreme edges at all. It was right there in the center. He called this breakthrough the middle way. It's this profound realization that the actual path to enlightenment, to real peace, requires a perfect, harmonious balance between drowning yourself in pleasure and starving yourself of needs. Now, ironically, when his 5 ascetic buddies saw him eating that rice to save his own life, they were totally disgusted. They thought he was a sellout, and they completely abandoned him. But honestly, Siddhartha didn't care. For the first time since he left that palace, he finally had the physical energy and the razor-sharp mental clarity to figure out the ultimate answer he'd been chasing. And Siddhartha's discovery of the middle way, that isn't just some dusty, ancient history fact. It's a mirror for how we live today. We are constantly swinging between overindulging in our comforts and totally burning ourselves out through extreme stress and hustle. So, I want to leave you with a question to chew on long after this explainer wraps up. Where in your own life are you currently living in the extremes? And what would it actually look like for you to step out of your own gilded cages, get off those thorn beds, and start walking your own middle way? Think about it. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible story with me. Catch you next time.